Welcome back to the new video series of Understanding COVID-19. In this video series, I will be discussing about the new evolving concept that is vasculitis, endothelitis in COVID-19. Since COVID-19 was first diagnosed in December 2019, the novel SARS-CoV-2 spread from the central Chinese province to almost every country in the world. Most persons with COVID-19 have a mild disease course, but about 20% develop a more severe course with a higher mortality. Why the new coronavirus seems to have a higher mortality rate than the seasonal influenza flu is not completely understood. Our understanding about the COVID-19 disease is evolving. Still, we are at our learning stage. In this video series, I would like to discuss about the thrombotic complication in COVID-19. During the initial phase of our understanding about COVID-19 was mainly the cytokine storm. Now the focus has changed to thrombosis issue. As usual, I am having some disclaimers. Early reports shows more likely a hypercoagulable stage. Exact prevalence of venous thromboembolism and treatment is very evolving phase. What I am saying today might not be true tomorrow, so make sure you keep updating. I will also try to keep you updated. Coming to question number 1, is there a real increase in incidence of thrombosis in COVID-19, or is the incidence just similar to other non-COVID diseases? We will check the case series, case reports. Once again, we are lacking of proper RCT trials. This was a brief report from China published in the Journal of Thrombosis and Hemostasis in April 2020. They analyzed 81 patients with severe disease. What they found was interesting: an increased incidence in venous thromboembolism, that is around 25%. And those patients had a very high D dimer and they had a very poor prognosis. This is another article published from Netherlands in April 2020 stating a very high incidence of thrombotic complication in COVID-19 patients. The incidence was around 31%. And they recommended increasing the dose of thrombosis prophylaxis. This month, another article was published from France in Circulation Journal checking the prevalence of pulmonary embolism in 107 patients diagnosed as COVID-19. They noticed a higher incidence of pulmonary embolism, that is around 20.6% patient had pulmonary embolism within a median time of 6 days from ICU admission. Note that this is pulmonary embolism, this is not about venous thromboembolism. These investigators went one step ahead to check whether this was an actual increase in the incidence compared to the patients without non-COVID. So basically they were comparing patients with COVID and patients without COVID. They compared the data with the same ICU interval in 2019. So what they found was scary: a 3 times increase in incidence of venous thromboembolism in patients with COVID-19, that is 21% against 6.1%. They compared with the influenza virus, where they found COVID had 2 times higher rate of venous thromboembolism. This is a multicentric prospective trial published from France in May first week in the Journal of Intensive Care Medicine. They analyzed all patients referred with ARDS with COVID-19 between a period of March 3rd and March 31st. This was mainly 4 ICUs in France. What they found was alarming. 64 out of 150 patients had clinical relevant thrombotic complication. That is, more than 40% patient had clinical relevant thrombotic complication. 17% had pulmonary embolism. Nearly all the patients who went for renal replacement therapy had circuit clotting. 3 patients on ECMO had circuit clotting. Interestingly, no patient developed DIC. And again, here also, they compared with other patients with ARDS, that is, COVID and without COVID. And they found a higher incidence of thrombotic complication in COVID-19, and pulmonary embolism was around 11.7% compared with the 2.1 in general population. This article, published few days back from Germany in Annals of Internal Medicine, they conducted a prospective cohort study of autopsy finding in venous thromboembolism who died due to COVID-19. This was first type of the case series. And this was the autopsy finding. I am not going into the detail of this. In the discussions, they mentioned that 1/3 of the patient had pulmonary embolism as a direct cause of death. Diffuse alveolar damage was seen in 67%, and the incidence of deep vein thrombosis was around 58%. And this is the macroscopic autopsy finding. This is the patchy aspect of the lung surface. This is the cut aspect of the lung surface where you can see a lot of clots. And this is a case of pulmonary embolism. And this is a case of deep vein thrombosis seen in the patients. This is the prostatic veins where they were able to identify a lot of thrombosis in the prostatic veins. So this is the table showing the macroscopic autopsy finding. So basically they were able to find a lot of thrombosis in the prostatic vein, and bowel there were a lot of ischemic colitis. This is a histopathological finding where we can see pulmonary embolism in the last slide. This is another article which came in NANGM in April stating that COVID-19 induced coagulopathy resulted in few cases of multiple cerebral infarct. And investigators in various parts came with a new terminology to explain this new phenomenon known as microclots. Microclots stands for microvascular COVID-19 lung vessel obstructive thromboinflammatory syndrome, and they have mentioned a hypothesis about the mechanism of action or the pathophysiology. This is the editorial of Gattinoni in the Critical Care Journal, where he asked whether COVID-19 pneumonia is ARDS or not. As I discussed before, the type 1 or the L type of ARDS may be a known type of ARDS. The type L and type L was discussed in the last video series. You can go through it for further details. And here, the type 1 had near normal pulmonary compliance with isolated viral pneumonia. So basically, he divided the pneumonia into two types, type 1 ARDS and type 2 ARDS. Type 1 was L type or not typical ARDS, where the lungs was normal in compliance and had isolated viral pneumonia. And he explained, or he suggested, microthrombosis as the reason of type 1, and the D-dimer level in these patients are very high, and he suggests us to perform daily coagulation parameters and the use of anticoagulation. So basically there is a lot of case series reporting from different parts of the world stating the increased incidence of thrombosis in COVID-19. Next question, how bad it is? In this article, they have stated in JAMA saying that coagulation dysfunction is one of the major cause of death in patients with severe COVID-19. So et al. Found that mortality was more common in the phase 2. It was mainly because of the thrombosis and pulmonary emboli compared with the patient who survived. And the D-dimer in patients with pulmonary embolism was very high compared to the patient without pulmonary embolism. And various studies showing the correlation between the D-dimer and severity and prognosis. So basically, higher the D-dimer, poorer the prognosis. And it was found that anticoagulation therapy was associated with decreased mortality in patients with coagulopathy. So anticoagulation treatment was associated with decreased mortality. The mortality was higher in COVID patients who was not receiving heparin compared with patient without heparin. So the COVID patient had a higher mortality compared with the patients without COVID. And in China, this routine not to use routine anticoagulation for prophylaxis. Probably that is the reason why we got a lot of patients without heparin. So coming to understand the pathophysiology of the disease or the problem, multi-organ involvement is mainly thought to be a multifactorial. It can be because of the virus damage directly, or indirectly it can be because of the cytokine storm, and previously it was thought to be of the cytokine storm, but now the importance of cytokine storm is coming down. The next cause can be because of the microclots, which I am discussing today. And the third and the final part is going to be the hypoxic damage to the body. So mainly there are four reasons. One, the direct damage by the virus. Second, the cytokine storm. Third, the microclots. And fourth, the hypoxia. So coming to the clot formation. Lot of change in opinions as more results are coming. So at present our understanding is that it is not only the hyperinflammation. This is a report finding stating that reported finding indicate the immunosuppression, endothelial activation, direct viral mediated tissue damage rather than hyperinflammatory injury which cause COVID dysfunction or more in COVID. And they didn't find any renovascular or interstitial inflammation in this patient, but they noticed endothelial activation. So in this report, hyperinflammatory injury was not the reason for the MORS. The patient had endothelial activation. So how does it happen? We know we are having two type of receptors. We are having ACE1 receptors and ACE2 receptors. The yellow one is the ACE1 and the blue is the ACE2. The main function of ACE1 is to convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. In the presence of ACE2 receptors, this angiotensin 2 converts to angiotensin 1,7. But when you are getting infected with SARS, the SARS attach to the cell with the help of the ACE2 receptors and the TMP-PRS2 receptors, and is getting internalized. So you are having less amount of ACE2 receptors. So your angiotensin 1 is able to convert to angiotensin 2, but the angiotensin 1,7 level come down. And there is two effect of this. One, your angiotensin level increases, and this virus can directly cause damage to your cell, which is not much predominant in COVID-19. This angiotensin 2 can actually increase your inflammatory cytokines, and these inflammatory cytokines will cause shedding of the ACE1 receptors. Shedding means there will be a transient increase in angiotensin 2 level in the body. So what is the effect of increase in angiotensin 2? Is there any evidence for this? In this article, what they found that in healthy patient, they compared with the COVID patients also. In COVID patients, the amount of angiotensin 2 concentration was almost double. And more severe the disease, more higher the angiotensin 2 level. More higher the viral load, more higher the angiotensin 2 level. So they said that the plasma level of angiotensin 2 from 2019 COVID infected patient was significantly higher compared to the healthy individuals, and the level of angiotensin 2 was strongly associated with the viral load as well as the lung injury. So this physiology, angiotensin 2 causes vasoconstriction, it causes endothelial activation, it can release pro-inflammatory cytokines, can cause platelet activation, it can cause accelerated lymphocyte recruitment and depression, and most importantly, it can cause free radical formation. So what happens? Here we are having angiotensin 2 level high. After some time, your ACE2 receptors, ACE1 receptors will come down. The high level of angiotensin 2 again will decrease your ACE1 receptors, and once the viral phase is over, you will be start having amount of ACE2 receptors back to your cell, but this is going to be in a higher amount, and again you will be having higher level of angiotensin 1. So basically we are having two phases. Phase 1 with lot of angiotensin and lot of angiotensin 2 and lot of receptor 1 and less of receptor 2, and phase 2 is increasing receptor 2 and lot of angiotensin 1. So we will be discussing about the first part. The higher level of angiotensin 2 increases the oxidative stress. Here we can see the higher angiotensin leads to the activation of the free radicals, and there will be a lot of free radicals inside the cell. It is known that ACE2 receptors actually is having protection against protection and is having endothelial protection. And what happens to the endothelium level? This will lead to the endothelial damage. Here we can see the endothelium on the both side. We are having a lot of free radicals here, which is getting converted. But once you are having SARS infection, the SARS gets attached to your cells with ACE2. Ultimately, your angiotensin level 2 increases, and this angiotensin 2 is going to damage your endothelium. So this will lead to endothelial dysfunction. So what happens if you damage your endothelium? In endothelium, you are having a lot of von Willebrand factors in the Whipple palate body, and these von Willebrand factors get outside the cell, or it is released into the circulation, which ultimately lead to the clot formation. This is one understanding about the thrombosis formation. And this clot is going to be one of the major pathophysiology problems we are going to face. Are we having evidence? This is an article which came in Thrombosis Research saying about a case where the von Willebrand antigen activity was around 555% increase. That's a massive elevation. And the von Willebrand factor activity was increased by more than 500%. Again, this was the article which I discussed in the beginning. This is a prospective cohort study. Here also they said von Willebrand activity, antigen and factor 8 was considerably increased in around 88% of the patient. And here we can see the endothelial damage with apoptosis. It is not only about the endothelium. The ACE2 receptors are seen in almost all the organs. Probably that is the reason why we are getting a lot of different spectrum in the disease. And this is the second phase. I will be discussing this in the second video series. So coming to what we can do. What about the anticoagulation? How much we have to anticoagulate? So in this studies, what we found that despite of anticoagulation, the patient had thrombosis. Again, in this article, same thing. Despite of anticoagulation, despite of the prophylaxis, the patient had increased amount of incidence of thrombosis. Chinese was the first one to come with the guidelines, where they said it is having a pathological basis. First, take the past history of the patient regarding the coagulation function. They have given a group of disease for this, and in all cases, we have to do routinely the coagulation test, and they have mentioned which all tests to be done. And DIC score should be done in all the patients. If you are having viscoelastic test like TUG, you can go for it. And if there is no contraindication, you start anticoagulation, either unfractionated heparin. European Society of Cardiology recently came with the guidelines and recommendation. This is a practical, simple algorithm. Here we can see when the patient gets admitted with COVID-19 symptoms, we have to divide the patients into high risk for thromboembolism or low risk for thromboembolism. This is basically based on the clinical findings like tachypnea, or patient is having CR desaturation, or lab findings like elevated CRP, or an increasing trend of D-dimer, or elevated fibrinogen. If it is negative, we consider this patient as a low risk of thromboembolism. Now check the D-dimer. If the D-dimer is more than 3 microgram per ml, you start enoxaparin 1 mg per kg BD. If the D-dimer is less than 0.5, you go for OD dose 40 mg enoxaparin. If the D-dimer is between 0.5 to 3, again you start with enoxaparin 40 mg but with a BD dose. If the patient gets admitted to ICU because of the high risk of thromboembolism, you have to start heparin drip parenterally and adjust the APTT around 60 to 85. If the patient is not admitted in the ICU, you can continue with enoxaparin 1 mg per kg BD or heparin drip. Then you have to perform a ultrasound POCUS And if you're having any evidence of embolism, you continue therapeutic anticoagulation, or if it is negative, you can go forward with a de-escalation to 40 mg BD. This is another guidelines by National Institute of Public Health at Netherlands. The recommendation was to start prophylaxis with low molecular weight heparin for all patients, irrespective of the risk scores. A baseline CT for IP admission is a must, and D-dimer based anticoagulation table also they have mentioned. So basically, if you are having a very high D-dimer, they advise to have a close monitoring of D-dimer, have a very low threshold of imaging. Routine thromboprophylaxis is a must, and if image is not feasible, if you are not able to take imaging, therapeutic anticoagulation should be considered. So to conclude, multi-organ involvement in COVID-19 is thought to be of multifactorial. It can be due to the direct virus, can be because of the cytokine storm. Previously, there was more interest on cytokine storm, but now things are changing. Third is the indirect damage due to clots, which we discussed today. And fourth is hypoxia or drug induced, which we'll be discussing in the next video series. Direct damage, cytokine storm, clots, and hypoxia. Thank you.